Right, shall we get going? If somebody's got their microphones on, if you can please turn those off, and if your camera creeps on as well, that'd be really useful. Welcome and good afternoon to this particular ticketed event for Insights 22. It's a pleasure to have you on board this afternoon, and hopefully we're going to run through a nice sort of awareness session around county lines and criminal exploitation. Please bear in mind that this event is being recorded as part of Insights 22, so it can be played back to colleagues who have unfortunately not been able to make it today. So just be aware of that. And also, I'll apologise in advance for anybody expecting to tune in and see the beaming face of Mick McNally, one of our colleagues. Unfortunately, he can't make it today, so we're just covering off some elements of his presentation as well. So do apologise for that. So yeah, the event is being recorded. If you've got any questions as we go through this, quite happy for you to put them in the chat, but we'll try and hold off the responses, etc., until we have a question session at the end. So if you can hang on to that, that'd be really, really useful. And again, in that session, hands up, and we'll just sort of work through that particular process as best we can. But hopefully we'll allow ourselves a good half hour, or we'll stay online for a sort of further half hour so that you can ask any questions if you see fit to do so. So please keep your camera and microphones turned off throughout the presentation as well. Just very, very quickly, well, there's the first question. We'll be sending out the slides. Yes, probably we will. We've got attendance lists, so we'll endeavour to do so. Yes, definitely. But yeah, a little bit about me then. So name's Nick Heading. I've worked in the prison service directly as an operational grade for many, many years, dating back to 1994, working in a number of prison establishments across the south and southeast. Before eventually going non-operational and working as an assurance advisor to prison group directors in the east of England, and spending some time doing audit and assurance work as well nationally, auditing prisons and special hospitals, and more recently joined a team within headquarters which is called EPSIG, which is the Effective Practice and Service Improvement Group. So that's HMPPS headquarters, of course. So I'm just conscious that we've got colleagues from around the estates. Our other speakers today are Katie Foster and Dr Kate Gooch, and we're delighted to have Dr Kate Gooch with us today, and they'll introduce themselves as they go through their particular parts of the session. Just in terms of a bit of signposting, what we're looking at today, we're going to run probably about 3 parts to this session. We'll run some awareness around county lines, more generically, and then a little bit more focused in terms of women, children, and what it's looking like within our custodial and some of our community environments. And then we'll have an element, we'll pause for a few minutes so people can stand up and get some blood back into their legs, etc. And then we'll have Dr Kate Gooch, which will present around the academic research and some work that's been going on in that space. And then we'll probably finish off with, what can we do about it, and sort of next steps element to it, and then into the questions. So that's just a little bit of a signposting of what we're doing. In terms of the Effective Practice and Service Improvement Group, so we're a team within headquarters which looks at effective practice and service improvement across the community and custodial environments. So we have a community arm which is looking at mainly the probation elements of the business, and a custodial arm as well. And we have a number of teams which operated within that. You may well have heard the standards coaching team, or the prison, or the PPSP, the Prison Performance and Support Programme. They're all part of EPSIG. But our particular team, which is Mick McNally, Katie and myself, in relation to the county lines side of things, are part of a cross-cutting team, and we look at thematics which cross-cut between the community and custody, and has sort of far-reaching implications therein. We also have some other members of the team which are looking at the multidisciplinary science of human factors. So we have quite a broad envelope of what we get involved in as well, with quite a small team. But we've done a number of work, stop take work now within what we call stock take work, looking at thematic reviews of county lines, criminal exploitation in a number of particular areas. That's included the approved premises in the community, YCS estate, the women's estate, and long-term high security estate as well. So that's sort of learning from that sort of comes together a little bit in terms of what we're presenting to you today. And we became involved within county lines element of it because mainly Mick McNally was asked to join HMPPS to support our understanding and knowledge and our resolve against gangs and violence, having been a former member of the police and working on Operation Trident. So that's kind of got us to where we are, and also highlighting the fact that we don't necessarily have a formal strategic, or didn't at the time have a formal strategic response to the issues which were being created around county lines and criminal exploitation. But again, this has spun off a little bit into support working with other partners, and that's why we're delighted to have Dr Kate Gooch with us today, the Deputy Head of Department and Associate Professor of Criminology at the University of Bath. So we're really looking forward to Kate's presentation as well. So in terms of moving this forward, what I'll do now is I'll hand this over to Katie, who will introduce herself and just take you through the next steps of the wider elements of county lines.
Great, thank you very much, Nick, for that introduction. And as Nick mentioned, I work in the cross-cutting team, so my name is Katie Foster. And before joining EPSIG just over a year ago, I was working as a prison officer in a Cat B men's local prison in London. And since joining the cross-cutting team, I've been working with prisons kind of more closely in the women's estate around county lines. So I'm going to start today's presentation just by giving more of a general overview of what county lines actually is. So what we're talking about when we talk about county lines, with a specific focus on the exploitation side of county lines. So I've got on the screen here what the Home Office definition is for county lines, but I'll just tease this out and explain it a bit more. So when we're talking about county lines, we're talking about a criminal business model, basically a methodology for transporting drugs from one area to another. And this is often across police or local authority boundaries. So county lines isn't an offence. Somebody wouldn't be charged specifically with county lines. It would be a related offence, so something like possession with intent to supply or possession of an offensive weapon, for example. County lines isn't also just drug dealing, and it's not necessarily gangs, although obviously there will be crossover with these things. But the key difference is that whereas gang activity is often oriented around the defence of a regional postcode or territories and identities, county lines is more financially motivated. So in essence, drugs are the commodity and county lines is the methodology through which these drugs are transported. And traditionally, county lines are thought of transporting drugs from inner city areas out into more kind of rural areas, hence the name of county lines. But actually, the distance between the importing and exporting area is not really relevant, and increasingly the methodology is being adapted, and county lines are operating kind of just within one region. So I've spoken a bit about what county lines isn't, but what actually is it then? What does define county lines? So firstly, it's the organisation behind it. So it's a network that is organising and controlling drugs and the people that work within the network. Secondly, it's the use of a dedicated mobile phone line. So you hear about deal lines, and that's often linked to county lines, which are used to make the order of the drugs. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, it relies on the exploitation of vulnerable people or children who are coerced into this activity. So the impact of county lines, often the importing areas where county line activity is reported, so whether that's an area in the community or whether that's in custody, which Nick will touch on in more detail a bit later. But in these importing areas, there's reports of increased levels of violence or of weapon-related crimes, and that's due to the amplified sort of supply and demand that this has on the economic illicit economy. county lines in the community is often associated with crack cocaine and with heroin. A recent report published by the National County Line Coordination Centre predicted that county line networks are controlling about 70% of the cocaine market in the UK. And the overall profit of county line networks annually in the UK is thought to be approximately 800 million. So the scale of this activity and of this type of criminality is big. And it's having a big impact on the community and in custody, which Nick will talk about. But as I mentioned, county lines is a business model that does rely on exploiting vulnerable people. So these people will be used in the workforce. So they'll be used to store drugs, to cut them, transport and distribute both drugs and money. So this allows the controllers of the line to maximise their profits, and it also reduces their risk because it separates them from the association with criminal activity and from the supply transaction. So it basically makes it safer for them to do this kind of activity. And any vulnerability can be a target. So there's a really broad profile of victims, but I'm going to speak more specifically about the vulnerabilities of women and children. And the exploitation of county lines or in county lines can be so severe that it's often classed as modern day slavery. So in fact, 50% of referrals through the national referral mechanism, which is for modern day slavery, are linked to county lines. So in this next slide, I'm just going to be talking about the stages of exploitation, which are typically used in recruiting for county lines activity. So the first of these is target. So at this stage, exploiters will often target potentially vulnerable people or children by observing them. They'll identify what their vulnerabilities are, what their needs and their wants are. And at this stage, somebody will be befriended, and the lifestyle of county lines will often be glamorised. So like the amount of money that can be made will be emphasised, and the fact that they might get enhanced respect from peers, or the kind of expensive clothes and trainers, and this is often done through music or through media and TV. They'll gain their trust, and this might be through a kind of forged friendship or a forged romantic relationship. Often when you speak to people that have been kind of involved in county lines, they'll say that, you know, they thought they were their mates, or sometimes it's even family members, and they thought they were people that they could trust when they kind of were initially getting involved. And increasingly social media is being used to recruit people, so Snapchat and Instagram, particularly for younger people. Once people have been targeted, they'll then be tested. So this is where exploiters will begin to train people in drug running. So getting them to complete tasks and activities that will make them feel wanted. They'll offer protection and like a sense of belonging and dependency. But then they'll also use this opportunity to test loyalty. So they'll be included in like thrill-seeking behaviours, and they'll be made to feel like they're making progression within the group, which will create further incentives. But then ultimately they will end up being trapped. So once a person is dependent on a group, and their relationship with exploiters is likely to become hostile. So at this stage, they might be experiencing direct physical, sexual or psychological violence, humiliation, drug addiction and isolation from family or friends are all used to entrap people. A big part of this kind of trap methodology is through debt bondage. So this is essentially where people are forced into debt which they can't pay back, and that's used as blackmail to kind of keep them active in the network. This is often done through kind of fake mugging. So somebody will be asked to transport drugs, and someone else from within the network, like unknowingly to them, will mug them of those drugs, and they will be forced to pay back the value of them, which will keep them trapped there. And with adults, the entrapment method is also cuckooing. So this is essentially where a person's property or home will be taken over by exploiters or organisers and used as a base to store and cut and deliver drugs from. The person might be kind of end up imprisoned within their own home, or potentially even kicked out of their home and ending up homeless. So although people might initially feel like they have a choice in joining a network, or feel like it's an attractive and like good option for them, ultimately they're in a situation that they can't get out of, and where the threats of violence to either themselves or their families are so high that they feel like they can't leave. So I'm now going to attempt to play a video. Hopefully the technology will be on my side and you'll be able to hear it, but shout out if you don't and I'll go try and deal with that. But this video is essentially an interview with a man who is the kind of more of an organiser level of a county line network, and he's being interviewed about how he uses children as part of this. So just as a bit of a trigger warning, there is offensive language in this video, and the content of the conversation is quite difficult to listen to and quite harrowing. The overall video is over 10 minutes. So I'm just going to play 3 minutes 40 seconds of it. So if you'd rather not listen to the video or don't want to, then it's absolutely fine for you to leave this call and come back, or just to mute whilst it's being played. So let's give this a go. I want it on approximately here. If you can't hear it, just shout out and I'll try and fix that. Cool. So I'll just pause that there. But if you want to watch the full video in your own time, then I can put the link in the chat. And obviously it's quite a difficult video to watch, I think. And I just wanted to pull out a few things that he mentioned in that video. So he described this as a win-win situation for him. So getting 5 youngers or young people to peddle food or deal drugs means that he can avoid going to prison. So for him, that's great. That's a win-win situation. He refers to the young people as easy targets, but then he also says that he's not forcing them to do anything, even though he's referring to them as targets. He says that these young people don't have role models and that people like him are role models for young people. He talks about the amount of money that can be made. Sorry, I can just see on the chat that the video did not work for one person, so I will make sure that I do put it in the chat, sorry. But yeah, that there a lot of money can be made, so £1,000 in the first day. So in comparison to kind of the legitimate means of making money for any other 16-year-old, it's a lot in comparison. But he also says that there are consequences and there are risks. He signals to something that he has in his jacket, potentially a weapon, and I think that the tone of the video is quite threatening, and it feels like there's a risk of violence for people that would want to say no. So just moving on to speak a bit more generally about children who are involved in county lines. So approximately 20% of people involved in county lines networks are children. The average age of a child involved in county lines is 15 years old, but children as young as 7 have been known to be involved, so primary school age, and that's becoming increasingly common. And children have been known to make as much as £800,000 a year in illegal profits. The vast majority of children involved in county lines are in workforce roles, so they're responsible for the running and the transporting of drugs. Because they don't drive, they'll be forced to use public transport, so getting on trains across the country far away from where they live to distribute drugs. And because they're on road, they're out in the public, they carry the majority of the risk and are most likely to be exposed to serious violence. But children are used because they're less likely to be stopped by law enforcement, so there's a smaller chance of the county line network being caught and shut down. They're also easily replaced, so if they do get caught, another one can be recruited or targeted just as easily. I've had children referred to as Bics, like Bics pens, because they're that easily replaceable. And children typically are easier to manipulate, to groom, to intimidate, and to exploit. So the next slide shows some risk factors that might make a child vulnerable to criminal exploitation, and specifically county lines. So I will let you read these. Most of them explain themselves, but they're all kind of examples of why a child might be more vulnerable, or why somebody might be targeted as being recruited into the network. But the last one, clean skins, I'll just explain this a bit more. So this refers to children or people who haven't been identified by law enforcement before, so they don't have any criminal records, or there's nothing about them kind of on the police system. They might be from stable homes or good schools, or not be stereotypically seen as vulnerable, and therefore they'll be a lot less likely to be stopped by law enforcement. And kind of unrelated to children, but in the same note as clean skins, county lines is a growing issue in universities, university campuses, university students being targeted who don't have any criminal record or background, or who aren't known to the police. So this here is a testimonial of a 15-year-old girl called Danielle, who was exploited by a county line network. So I'm not going to read this out, I'll just leave this on the screen for 30 seconds or so for you to read in your own time. This was from a BBC News article. Again, I can put the link in the chat for the whole article. So just a few things to highlight here is around, essentially she was targeted because she was less likely to get stopped because of her height, her ethnicity, her age and her gender, about how girls aren't spoken about in county lines, and really that they're at the forefront of the business because they fly under the radar. And lastly, this point about she didn't know she was trapped until it was the point where she tried to leave. So this moves us on to speak about women and women's involvement in county lines. About 13% of people within county lines data, so that we know about, are linked to county lines, and the majority of those are in workforce roles, so the runners and the distributors. But the actual statistic of women involved in county lines is thought to be a lot higher and is thought to be growing. Because they're less of a target for suspicion, and they're thought to be increasingly asked to carry drugs and weapons and to transport them across the country. We've done a lot of work with women in custody who have been involved in county lines through like a lot of conversations, and this has kind of highlighted that a lot of women initially have become involved through forged romantic relationships. So in human trafficking, this is known as the Loverboy Method, and it's a really similar kind of tactic, but it's where men, typically older men, forming relationships with typically younger women, they groom them with gifts, with affection and promises of a luxury lifestyle, but coercive control soon kicks in and is levered to exert influence over the women. So they'll be forced to be involved in a network. Often it's kind of through cutting the drugs at home or looking after them or tending to the plants if it's that kind of drug business. But women will be isolated from their friends and family, and their phone will be controlled. They won't be able to contact anyone. CCTV might be put up in their house. They might not be allowed to leave. Their property might be cuckooed and imprisoned within their own home. They're often subject to economic abuse, financial abuse, where their bank accounts will be monitored or they won't be allowed to use them, and sexual violence. So women involved in county lines and gangs are at much higher risk of sexual violence. Both women and children, and I guess a lot more generally, people who are kind of victims of being exploited by county lines will not recognise themselves as vulnerable, and they'll often see those descriptions as patronising and undermining, and because of their method of exploitation, initially being through a friendship or relationship, they'll feel like they had a choice to become involved, and it won't be until that kind of final stages where they're trapped and they realise that they can't get out that the severity of the situation is realised. So hopefully that's been kind of a helpful overview of what county lines is, and specifically the exploitation and impact on safety and vulnerability that it has. So I'm now going to pass back to Nick, who will speak a bit more about why this is relevant in HMPPS and about county lines in more of a custodial setting. Thank you, Nick.
Right, thank you, Katie. Hope everyone can hear me okay as we just swap around presenters there. Yeah, really insightful look at that broader picture, and yeah, that video, I've watched the full video, and it did actually bring a tear to my eye. It was quite upsetting, but it is worth looking just to get a lot of this into context. And of course also you pick up on the language that's being used as well, and the terminologies, and a little bit later on we'll just highlight that's something to look out for when we work in custodial environments. And yeah, we are sorry that there may be some technical issues going on in relation to seeing the slides and seeing the videos, etc. I'm not too sure what they are, but there's nothing that we can potentially influence from this end, apart from the good old adage of turn off and on again, i.e. leave the chat and rejoin it, sometimes fixes those problems. But I can't offer anything more than that, I'm afraid, at the moment. But yeah, here we go. So let's just move into the next section in relation to this. And I appreciate my camera's off, so I'll just turn that. There we go. In case he's just posted that video in the chat. So county lines, it's not hidden, we just aren't looking. It's a terminology that we're trying to use nowadays. It's all around us. We can see it in the community, and we can see it in our prison establishments now, but just linking that up is a very difficult thing to do, certainly for our staff, and certainly within, you know, probation services as well. It's just that sort of common trend that runs throughout. But it's a good question to think about, bearing in mind that county line offenders are known to exploit vulnerable people and traffic drugs, driving our violence and debt, and certainly creating issues around the illicit economy, self-harm and bullying. It's basically in your areas of work or your areas of influence. Do you know who these particular county line nominals or offenders are, and how they're impacting on our work around safety, security and reducing reoffending? And very often we don't. Is possibly the answer, but maybe you do. But our sort of research, our sort of highlight look in relation to all of this tends to show that we don't really know what's going on under our eyes. So this slide is basically designed just to demonstrate why we consider it a cross-cutting issue. HMPPS has a number of strategic objectives, particularly around safety and security, reducing reoffending and protecting the public, of course. And county lines activity does impact on that across the piece, really. So if we're looking at safety and security, of course, you know, this is about a drug dealing methodology in the part, and drugs are an issue within custody and approved premises and a number of areas as well. So we do find that this puts pressure on our security systems in terms of visits, ingress into our establishments, and also sort of ongoing offending or license recalls to get drugs back into the prison through the body, for example. So we do have that, and we do notice that there's violence between those with county line links as well. And we appreciate that you have some of these particular rivalries which plan out when people are compressed and compacted into sort of smaller areas. So you'd be that in the community or into prison environments when we're talking about house block cells, just the main prison itself. When we're starting to put these teams, these workforces together that are striving to earn as much money or P for their managers, so to speak, violence can ensue. But we're also seeing different dynamics which are now coming out at play, whereby traditional rivalries are being put aside because of the lucrative nature of this particular business model and how that's amplified within the prisons. So actually we've seen rivalries put aside and rival gangs or criminal networks coming together to exploit this new market. And certainly we're linked in with that. There's that intimidation of prison and probation staff, and of course the vulnerability of county lines victims, the safeguarding elements of it. You know, it's necessary and important work, but it's you know, makes an incredibly big part of our business when we start to take that into consideration. And then there's that reducing reoffending element of it. We know that county lines is you know, debt bondage is the major sort of mechanism that plays out in it, and that debt traps people into that criminal exploitation, as Katie alluded to earlier, and that it just keeps on with recidivist behaviours and other activities which are related to it. So that just grows and grows and grows. So reducing reoffending is impacted, and also, you know, the severity of offending increases over time as well. So even as people move up the workforce and become maybe bigger players, they start to arm themselves, the violence increases in severity, and we see that in offending patterns as well. And also we've got to identify that and be open to the fact that this is a growing business. Our prisons or our services that we do under HMPPS do contain a lot of vulnerable individuals, and therefore they can be easily recruited into this business model and coerced into the activities. And of course, we have our duty to the public as well. And we do know that drug lines are being run in the community from within prison. We've interviewed prisoners who have mentioned that whilst they were in the community, the person that was controlling them was phoning from a cell within a prison. We've visited prison establishments where we've opened prison estates where we've identified individuals that are able to continue this activity and put those threats against the public. And of course, we have to factor in that defenders continuing that counterline activity do so whilst under probation supervision as well. So that's why we've done a lot of work with approved premises as well, and we later will allude to some of the support that's available in relation to that. And of course, those offenders do develop and grow new criminal capabilities and networks as well. So people learn a better business sometimes. So we just need to be really, really conscious of that. So all of that really does impact on what we're trying to achieve as HMPPS. So, and we need to question why those activities are happening as well. And this is the important element of it. You know, start to challenge at start of it. We need to analyse the sort of performance trends and the spikes of violence and self-harm that's happening in our establishments, and just trying to see whether there's a potential link with that and County Lines activity as well. And we know that we don't pursue the potential that those county line nominals are impacting on our stability within our establishments as well. As a prison service, we're very, very good at picking out some of the high level OCGs and some of the higher individuals of risk, particularly around self-harm and issues like that. But we don't necessarily see the people which are playing out below the workforce. It's so busy that we often are unsighted to it. So again, we do encourage staff through our support to look at that a little bit more and not just concentrate on right up the line, but the workforce as well. So just linking in what county lines in custody. So we know that there's over 3,500 prisoners serving sentences linked to county lines. And as Katie said earlier on, county lines isn't an offence per se, but there's lots of linked in potential offending to it, possession with intent to supply weapons, all those sort of aspects of it as well. But the police are very good, and they annotate the police national computer with anybody that's been involved with county lines network that they're aware of through their intelligence systems, and they can identify them as workforce and managers as well within that, and that really gives us a good insight if we can access that data, which we're now starting to do a lot more effectively. But in April alone, we kind of worked out that we have about 3,735 known county line prisoners or linked prisoners within custody, certainly within our prison establishments. And if we just break that down a little bit in terms of regions as well, for those of you which are working within certain regional clusters, we know that in the East Midlands, there's about 294 within custody. In the East, there's 479. In London, there's 525. Bear in mind, that's just 9 prison establishments. In the northeast, there's 104. In the northwest, there's 461. In the south and southeast, there's 656. But there are 22 prisons, but it's still a significant number. In the southwest, there's 192. In Wales, there's 230. In the West Midlands, there's 502. And in Yorkshire and Humber, that's 292. And I think that goes to highlight that nowhere is exempt from these particular issues and these particular concerns. It is now very much a national issue. So where we traditionally thought that this is really sort of something that affects London or the Midlands or Liverpool area, it's really not that at all. It is across, and every area is feeling the impact of this. We also have activity that's taking place partly by the police in terms of what's known as intensification activities, and this leads to a significant number of arrests when it happens, and that also means that there's a lot more individuals that are potentially coming into our care or into our systems into HMPPS for us to manage and support going forward as well. So it's an increasing issue in relation to that, but rightly so, because we need to enforce, and we need to be doing something about this. But we know that there's a market within custody. Value of drugs in prisons being at least 5 times more than in the community. So our prison environments are easy to exploit in relation to that when the money's involved. So in very basic terms, the County Lines network is being run from either the community or from within prisons. It's organising the conveyancing of drugs into custody and dealing them. But we're equally concerned about that exploitive element of it, and a lot of this presentation is very much linked to that exploitive element of it. So those people are being exploited to convey drugs into the prisons on visits. We have those licence recall, and also, fortunately, we do have to accept that HMPPS staff are vulnerable to this and are being conditioned to convey drugs as well. So, you know, our people in our care are being targeted, our staff are being targeted as well in relation to this. County Lines offenders will see staff as vulnerable people because of their position of power and influence, which seems like an adverse situation, but there's a reality there. This type of activity is happening, expanding within custody with tactics that mirror what we see in the community as well. So that cuckooing of properties translates to cuckooing of cells within custody, for example. The phone lines, of course, because we do have a huge problem with phones in custody, with the small Zancos and those elements of it. And the big players of it don't hold those phones, they get the workforce to do it. So actually trying to pin it all down is incredibly difficult for us to do. So that's impacting on violence, debt, self-harm, the self-isolation, of course, staff corruption. So it's posing that significant risk to safety and security. But we are ultimately provided by intelligence on known perpetrators and victims as well. We do have a process which is the National County Lines Coordination Centre, and that's part of MARSOC, the Multi-Agency Response to Serious Organised Crime, who collate a significant amount of data around county line linked offenders, and there is a process in which we try to make sure that is being supplied routinely to establishments into the probation intelligence systems, so that we can actually work with that data a lot more effectively between our agencies. So just a little bit around the themes that our work is finding within HMPPS, and when we do our work, we try to link it into a number of different areas, and that's recognise, record, refer, and respond. And in relation to recognising the signs and symptoms and the perpetrators related to county lines offending, I mean, we know across the piece, across certainly our prison establishments, the awareness of county lines is incredibly limited. And most establishments are not aware of the prisoners linked to county lines, and this tends to be due to communication gaps between the National County Lines Coordination Centre, our intelligence systems, and ultimately into the prisons themselves. And we do know there's a lack of clear communication line for those who identify prisoners who are potentially linked to county lines as well. We don't necessarily have the appropriate systems to record that. I'll come on to that in the record section. And also we foul up quite obviously in a number of areas. PIN monitoring, listening into the calls to a certain extent from a security perspective is a fundamental part of security, and we ask teams to do that, but we don't necessarily give them the insight into county lines and the language as well, so people don't necessarily know what they're listening to. So we did struggle to gather the intelligence out of that. It makes it rather a pointless process, and also we strive on quantity for our targets and not necessarily the quality of what we're doing as well, so which is a bit of a risk. But in relation to recording as well, there's no system to record prisoners linked to county lines within our prison system, NOMIS, for example, and Endelius as well. There's an element of registering under gangs, etc. And we know that the PNC does. So, part of our work going forward is to make sure that we can identify appropriate flags so that people can then identify it and then offer the right levels of support or be aware of the potential risks. We also have our intelligence systems as well, our intelligence reporting systems, which a lot of people lack confidence in at the moment for various different reasons. And again, this is an area of work that we're doing with the Directorate of Security, or they've certainly picking up in relation to improving our intelligence systems and the confidence within them. And also, you know, sites themselves not necessarily working with the data that they might have around county lines offenders as well. So later on we'll just allude to some of the support that we can do to our intelligence teams as well, but there's no data collection on those linked to the county lines as well. But let's say it's not all bad, you know, there are systems for anonymous intelligence disclosures for prisoners and visitors. We have found that. We do know that there's exit interviews which are going on, and they're really, really good opportunities which result in information disclosures as well. So, you know, there is good work going on, not all bad. In terms of referring, you know, effective communication, information sharing between different departments in prisons is a bit inconsistent, and we know information sharing between prisons and external agencies is inconsistent. We also well aware that really fundamental areas like the offender management units, no, the OMIC element of it, you know, very often not engaged by other sort of elements or departments within prisons into the information that's held, or actually linked into the information that the intelligence that we're getting to support that side of it as well. So we're really trying to make OMIC a little bit more central in terms of the information flows as well, the OMUs and the POMs, etc. Prison offender managers. But, you know, we've seen good work again with security liaison officers that can be a little bit more focused in relation to it. We've seen good work where there's joint intelligence hubs which bringing together safety and security to build a holistic picture of intelligence. Places which have regular security briefings and bulletins, notice boards in relation to it as well, really good. And certainly collating lists of county line linked offenders and making sure that's distributed appropriately to the areas of risk through local tactical briefings, etc. as well. Really, really good. So, you know, areas which do that are starting to see a better response to the risks that are being created. But also in terms of responding to this as well, we know that it's a big question, so what, and what can we do about it, and how do we respond to it? But we're not trying to build a whole new approach to this. We know that we've got some systems in place that if we signpost the issues around county lines and criminal exploitation a bit better, we can utilise ACT, the assessment, care and custody and teamwork support process, is viable and should be used appropriately to support people at risk in relation to this, who are being exploited, being bullied, etc. We just need to signpost that better. We have the CSIP process, which is challenge support and intervention planned within custody as well, and we've struggled to make sure that that lands, you know, really, really well. But again, it's coming on, it's developing, it's a good process, and it just needs the support with some better thematics, particularly around county lines and criminal exploitation, bullying and intimidation. We have got processes, we just need to make them work a bit better for us. There's lots of examples of courses and interventions across the piece, but again, it's very difficult to pin that down to something that's specific around county lines. And hopefully that will start to be developed fairly soon. And of course, we've had, you know, from the prisoners themselves that we speak to, they've said their biggest points of vulnerability to reoffending was release and lack of stable housing and employment as well. And this really starts to link into some of the Deputy Prime Minister's objectives in relation to housing and employment. So again, that's something we really do need to focus into. But I suppose the burning question is sort of, what does this sort of thing look like? So these are sort of the classic county line signs, symptoms and behaviours. Now, these signs, signals, behaviours, what we've become aware of and manifest in the community and custody. Unfortunately, many of these have been highlighted to us by people with lived experience who've used these indicators to exploit or recruit people into networks. I'm not going to go through every single one. We haven't got particular time for that. But again, where we're seeing increases in self-harm and drug use, that's an indicator of issues around county lines. Where we're seeing the use of nicknames and language as well. So that language that was in that video earlier on, when people are starting to hear things like that on the units, we've kind of got to tune into it a little bit, or within our approved premises as well. Just being aware of that. In relation to unexplained injuries, I've as a prison officer many years ago, we always used to have somebody that was manifesting some injuries, cuts, bruises, or some incredibly serious slashes. Sometimes, most of the time, it was I fell over in the shower. We know that's not the case. We know there's a particular issue on it, but we come blind to that, and actually we need to possibly develop that a little bit more. We just hand over to healthcare units and don't necessarily look at what intelligence that we can get out of that. Of course, those trap houses and unwelcome and excessive visitors. So that was that cuckooing element of things that we see in the community, where houses are taken over and vulnerable people are trapped within that. And you do tend to then start to see higher numbers of people going to those properties, be it in the community or the cells within custody as well. Also linking into visits as well, and the vulnerabilities that we have, for example, within prison visits, for example, of those individuals which are coming in to try and deliver drugs to somebody, but from the person that turns up to the visits hall who doesn't necessarily identify their visitor, can't see who their visitor is. Well, actually, there's a warning sign there that they're being visited by somebody that they don't know, and we should be responding to that. Or people which are very reluctant to go on their visits because they know that they're actually being exploited and they're going to be asked to bring stuff in. Again, it's just picking up on these early signs. There's changes in personality in company, yes, nervous and unusual behaviour, the damage to property. We see that a lot. We've seen that in the community. We spoke to a prisoner in Foston Hall, for example, who had been cuckooed, bless her, and her car was smashed up because she was trying to exit or ask people to leave, or just trying to resist the county lines activity. So we do see that. So when we start to see people's property being smashed randomly, then maybe there's some threats, etc., that's going on there. And the unusual friendships, that's a real key one. I've had a personal experience when I was in Canterbury one day, and I saw a couple of teenage lads walking out of McDonald's, and with a number of youngsters with them, all chomping into their freshly bought burgers. And at the time, I really didn't link it. I wasn't dealing with county lines or criminal exploitation. But in hindsight, when you look back, you think, well, that's not right. There's an unusual friendship going on there. They weren't related for various different reasons. You could see that, and it was just a bizarre thing to see in hindsight. But we see sort of strange and unusual friendships happening within our custodial environments as well, and it's about questioning that and what's going on, and maybe there's something that we just need to link through to in our intelligence pictures. But also, it's just simple things as well. When we see prison leavers, for example, people going out to what we class as no fixed abode, for example, but they're being picked up by somebody in an Audi Q8 from outside the establishment. There's clearly something amiss there. But if we don't actually get the people which are seeing that on board with this particular agenda, we're not going to get that intelligence flow through, and we can't report it through and get the police involved. But we do see that happening. Certainly the lack of food and hoarding as well. Certainly within the prison environment, within cells, we can often see cells which just have nothing in them. And then a poor individual sat in it, but we do see a lot of activity going to that cell. And then you can see other cells which are absolutely stocked to the brim with property. And I'll just link round to sort of that inappropriate wealth as well. And sort of we've seen this, or we've certainly had notice of this with people which have been working with not directly within the approved premises, but within the unpaid work initiatives, the community payback initiatives in the community, when people have been turning up one day quite bedraggled, next day dressed up in the latest fashions, for example. Well, there's obviously something going on there, and we just need to tune into that. So there's some elements in relation to signs, signals, symptoms and behaviours. Hopefully that's a little bit of an insight in relation to that. Again, hopefully when we get the slide deck out to you, that'll have a little bit more information about each of those individual ones. At which point, we'd probably like to offer you the opportunity to have a 5-minute break and a stretch. We've been talking now for about an hour, so if you want to take 5 minutes and come back at 13:35, hopefully we can invite Dr. Kate Gooch to continue the presentation for us. Thank you. Okay.
Hello.
Okay, right.
Yes, thank you. Shall I get my slides up, do you think?
Yes, please. Yes, and then
just close it. That look okay?
yes, it does. Yes, thank you.
When I can
Okay.
get the background Teams thing up.
You're a wizard.
Can you still see my slides?
Yes, I can.
Oh, awesome. Cool. I'm just going to quickly grab a drink then.
Yeah, no problems.
And then I'll
Likewise.
be back.
Right, thank you. Right. I think I'll make that the 5 minutes. I don't know if everyone concurs.
I do.
But, okay, so hopefully welcome back everybody, and host Dr. Kate Gooch, thank you ever so much for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the introduction earlier. So what I'd like to do for my presentation is to first of all contextualise some of what we've heard around County Line networks and how they evolve and manifest within prison, and put that in a broader context, but also to articulate a little bit more the kind of the distinctions and overlap between concepts of gangs, organised crime and county lines, and then also then to talk about how with using a particular case study of a criminal network within one category local prison, how all of these things evolve within real time and within prison. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw on a wider research study around organised crime within prisons and crime within prisons, but I'm also going to focus on a particular case study of the aforementioned mentioned category local prison, which focused very particularly on county lines, models and criminal networks within a prison.
Sorry, Kate, you've muted yourself.
Oh, thank you. I don't know how I did that, technology. So one of the things when we're thinking about different forms of harmful group behaviour and different forms of criminal networks within prison and how those all mesh together is that there is quite a lot of definitional ambiguity and conceptual ambiguity about just what we mean by county lines, gangs, organised crime. And the definitions don't always perhaps help us because they're often a bit vague and a bit fluid, and they sorry, I'm distracted by the postman indicating there's a parcel at me, the joys of working from home. The definitions are also relatively vague and could fit a number of scenarios. So if we look at organised crime, for example, the government has adopted I think I'm going to just have to get the door 1 second.
Okay, so there we go, everybody. The joys of a live event like this. But Kate is now coming back, and you don't have to hear me sing a tune, so that's good.
So sorry, my dog does not like the postman. So organised crime. So one of the things that a number of governments have agreed on is the UN Convention on Transnational Organised Crime and its definition of organised crime, which is a group of 3 or more persons existing over a period of time, acting in concert with the aim of committing crimes for financial or material benefit. Now, in some ways, that's somewhat helpful because it directs us to the fact that organised crime may be for financial motive, and generally what we know from interviewing people who have been engaged in organised crime in the community or in prison is that it is essentially a business model, that it's primarily for financial gain, and that can come in various forms, whether it be drug dealing or human trafficking, or related to terrorism potentially, but often in prison we're talking about drug dealing when we're talking about organised criminal activity, in terms of the reasons why perhaps organised crime moves into prisons. It's relatively loose beyond that though, in terms of it's just got to be 3 or more people. And the Serious Crime Act 2015 replicates some of this ideology and methodology. So the Act defines an organised crime group as a group that has as its purpose, or as one of its purposes, the carrying out of criminal activities. So again, as I say, it's very vague. It leaves plenty of room. It's a very baggy definition. And again, it reinstates this idea of it's got to be 3 or more people, but they don't need to be a group for any length of time. They don't need to be a group of a particular level of sophistication or hierarchy. And I think one of the things we notice within British organised crime, perhaps perhaps compared to what we know about Italian organised crime or other jurisdictions that have much more mafia style organised crime, is we don't tend to have the same structure and formality that perhaps we often think of when we think of organised crime. I think one of the things we'll notice later is this distinction as well between what is organised crime and has a degree of sophistication and longevity, and what is simply a group of people or perhaps a handful of individuals coming together to commit a crime that requires some degree of organisation, because you've got to, for example, organise packages coming into a prison or the transfer of money, etc., but may not constitute organised crime. And already, even saying all of that, we could see something of the blurring. One of the things where we're also seeing overlap is when we think about gangs. So where you have gangs, the definition that's used for the civil gang injunctions is that it's a group that consists of at least 3 people. So we can see already that there's this emphasis on 3 people again. But what seems to separate in legislative terms organised crime and gangs is that for a gang, there's an emphasis on characteristics that would identify them as a group. And for gangs, those characteristics in legislative terms can be quite broad. So it might be apparel, like something in the clothing, or colours, or signing, or location. And it's where we perhaps start to see some of what we some of the ways in which we try and separate in our minds between gangs and organised crime. And with gangs, the assumption is typically that it's geographically bound in some way, whereas organised crime, there's assumption that it is moving across borders, whether that be county borders, city borders, or transnational borders. What probably has happened in the community around gangs is that there's been a little more of a morphing into some economically driven criminal activity, and this is where we perhaps see sometimes the overlap again with county lines. Now, county lines, as has already been very eloquently put and described, it's not another way of defining a group, and it's not in and of itself an offence, but it's a kind of business model and a set of behaviours which gangs, organised crime groups, or even just what we might describe as urban street groups that are fluid and diffuse might morph into. But the assumption is primarily that county lines is defined by having a dedicated mobile phone line or another form of deal line, and that's certainly represented in the Home Office definition of county lines. And as we've already heard, the emphasis around county lines in terms of distinguishing it from other sorts of behaviour is that it ordinarily or is likely to involve some degree of exploitation of children and vulnerable adults to move and store drugs and money that will often use coercion, intimidation, violence, including sexual violence and weapons. We should be careful though, because county lines isn't new behaviour. It hasn't. This kind of method hasn't been newly invented, but I think what we do recognise is that the way in which it's moving across counties and the way in which young people involved might have changed over time. I think it's automatically muting when I skip slides. So when we're thinking about county lines, gangs and organised crime, I think the key things to bear in mind is that when we're thinking about county lines, it's a kind of business model, or it's a behaviour rather than an offence, and it's primarily centred around drug dealing. And as we heard earlier, it may involve cuckooing and the exploitation of vulnerable people. But those who are involved in county lines behaviour will come into prison for a range of offences, whether that be false imprisonment, conspiracy to supply, violent offences, kidnapping, robbery, etc. So I think sometimes one of the things I've noticed when working within prisons is that that can be missed because people are looking for a drug supply or drug possession offence, rather than looking a bit more broadly at the range of connected behaviours with drug dealing, county lines, and that sort of criminal activity. Violence is a very useful tool within that sort of enterprise, because it's a necessarily illicit and illegal enterprise, so people cannot rely on law enforcement, and so violence often does the trick in terms of ensuring compliance, punishing violations, etc. Now, organised crime is essentially a form of business enterprise, and it often involves the threat of violence and sometimes its use. But as I've alluded to earlier, it's much more informal and diffuse than perhaps our assumptions around organised crime and what the media represents as organised crime might suggest. And the important difference with organised crime, when we separate it from other forms of criminal activity, is an attempt to corrupt or usurp state authority and power. But that can happen in very subtle ways within a prison. You know, in a prison, corruption of state authority doesn't necessarily come just in the form of conditioning and corrupting a prison officer. It might be, for example, that the enhanced prisoner who is the gym orderly or the cleaner on the wing is also allowed to, for example, get away with violating rules or not going behind his door when he should do, or gets more additional freedoms, and in that way is allowed to be involved in the illicit economy or continue his illicit affairs with relative impunity. Or it's if prison officers allow prisoners to police themselves within the wing, and perhaps even use violence reduction representatives or mentors or orderlies to have a role in policing or punishing inappropriate behaviour. And it's in those ways that state authority can be corrupted and organised crime can move inside. Now, it's important to remember that organised crime within prison does look like drug dealing, making money from the trafficking of weapons and mobile phones, but organised crime taking place within prison can also be outward facing, in the sense of people will arrange from within prison hits in the community. They will arrange for people to come into prison on recall or for a short sentence, holding drugs, sometimes under pressure. They will chase debts that have been accrued within prison by using their networks within the community. And it can very often involve exploitation of those in the community and in the prison. And it's important to separate between organised crime and crime that is simply organised on a very short-term basis and with very little longevity and structure. So I think one of the things that's noticeable for our international research, which has taken into account Western Australia, New Zealand and England, and patterns of prison violence and organised crime and gangs across those jurisdictions, is although sometimes in prisons I hear language around there's gangs within the prison, we don't have the structure of prison gangs in this country that is present in other jurisdictions. So there's some examples there from on the picture from the US. The bottom one is from New Zealand. This is one of the places where we did the research. Prison gangs in these contexts provide governance, structure, and kind of organised prisoner society in ways that doesn't happen in England and Wales. In England and Wales, it's predominantly organised crime nominals and people who are involved in the illicit economy that become the businessmen and sit at the top of the prisoner hierarchy. One of the important differences as well between gangs, if they exist within English prisons and within other jurisdictions, is they just lack the degree of formality, structure, constitution and longevity that our English gangs do not have. So I think what tends to happen in other jurisdictions is you'll have very active gang activity within prisons. People will be arranging gang hits, they'll be resolving gang conflict, but they'll also be actively recruiting members to their gang. And I think what we notice within the English prisons is you don't have that same level of recruitment. But if we want to think about the differences between prison gangs and the prison firm, you know, prison gangs are tendencies to think of them as more of a fraternity or a brotherhood, or to offer a kind of family context that is missing elsewhere. and some of that might morph into organised crime, but it's not primarily business orientated, whereas the prison firm or organised crime within prison is business orientated. When we think about prison gangs versus the prison firm, there is a difference between the location of it. So whereas prison gangs tend to have an identity or regional identity, it tends to be more geographically dispersed when you're thinking about organised crime. And this is where I think sometimes the red herring arises, because what will tend to happen with young men in particular is that when they come into a prison, they will tend to locate with people of their region, and that can sometimes be conflated with gangs activity. And also there's a tendency to conflate urban street groups with gangs. And one of the things that is noticeable for us is that we just don't see the same level of gang involvement in that sense. Gangs, if we're being a bit crude about it, the tendency would be to see prison gangs or gangs fighting over turf, whereas if there is conflict in organised crime, it's about capital. We don't tend to have the codes and constitutions in our gangs structures that you see elsewhere, and those tend to be lacking in organised crime. You don't always see symbols of organised crime, but you will see it sometimes in terms of gangs, so patches, i.e. tattoos, colours, etc. And the prison gangs traditionally are quite hierarchical, which you don't always see in quite that regimented way with organised crime in England and Wales at least. But one of the things that is true of both is the degree of association and flexible labour, as Hobbes puts it, but disloyalty is punished in both cases. There's very strict views about whether or not what's required of members and their loyalty to the group. So I think overall, across all the prisons and YOIs, few prisoners that we've interviewed would identify themselves as gang members, and considerable care needs to be taken to avoid labelling diffuse street groups as gangs. And it has a very small contribution to prison violence in most prisons. So what we notice is some people within prison will resolve conflict or bring up imported conflict from the community, but that isn't making the contribution to the increase in prison violence. There's been a shift of youth street groups towards economic activities in the community. So again, that is changing the face of what we might traditionally think of as gang activity. And for those young men in particular who are associated with the gang in whatever way or an urban street group, we notice that that can serve as an entry point into more organised crime, but it doesn't tend to work the other way. People who are implicated in organised crime don't tend to join a gang. And gangs, as I've already said, don't actively recruit members within prison, but it can be disruptive in other ways. For example, if you're in a prison where a number of people are the subject of a civil gang injunction and therefore need to be kept apart, it can cause these difficulties that way. So when we're thinking about criminal networks within prison, we're largely dealing with three different sorts of network formation. So one of them is where networks are imported into the prison and then continue. So that might be a group of people involved in a particular network. Perhaps they've all been arrested under a particular operation of the National Crime Agency or law enforcement agency. They move into prison, they maintain their associations, even if it's across prisons, and they continue their network. Or you can have criminal networks that develop within prison and function within prison. Or you can have criminal networks that function within the community, but it involves individuals who are serving a sentence inside. So, for example, someone who sits in their cell and organises a murder that is carried out within the community, or someone who sits in the cell and is organising witness intimidation from within their cell. But to just reinforce some of the points about the purpose and the function and nature of these criminal networks, one person said it's 100% business for me, nothing else. And I set it up as a business with a tier of people, with me at the top as the chief exec, if you like, and then you've got people beneath you running the thing. So you've got a lad that drives and picks it up, you've got a lad that holds it, you've got a lad who holds the money, you've got the people who move it. It's just pure business. And this is probably the fallacy, I think, of just focusing on the person who is found with the contraband in the prison, because they're often not the person organising it, and they may actually be holding the contraband under duress or coercion. So another person said, say someone's convicted on the outside of organised crime of a massive drugs, money laundering type of thing, drug smuggling, huge, worth a lot of money, and then they come into jail. They carry on the illegal activities because they know the right people, they're able to. It's more coordinated, it's less violent, but it's more financially beneficial, if you know what I mean. And I guess this tests our assumptions that once people are arrested and remanded or sentenced, that their criminal activity will cease. And we know that a number not only are continuing their activities, but are deliberately going into prison to make 5, 10, 15 grand because it's such a lucrative market. And another person said drug dealing puts food on a lot of lads' tables out there and in here. And I think that points to the fluidity across the border and the walls and the fences. It says we need to keep earning, and there are ways to do that. Big money, as much money as can be earned out on the road. So I just wanted to give you this example of one of the criminal networks and how it functions. And this relates back to the case study that I mentioned at the beginning in a category local prison. And I think it's quite indicative of how, for example, people who are connected with county lines and other forms of group behaviour can merge into one, and how criminal networks can develop within prison, but also be prison formed. So this network and the intelligence around it actually developed when looking at one individual right in the middle of the network, which I can't quite put a ring around, but he's the one who's connected to the phone and the throwover. And this network and I2 chart was developed on the basis of one throwover within the prison, and then over the course of time, more throwovers happened within a 3-month period. But as you can see, all of those throwovers were connected in some way to this one network. So you can see here how that one individual was connected to a mobile phone, and that mobile phone was connected to 3 other people, and they themselves were all connected. And the intelligence around this particular network was developed initially with using some of the prison security intelligence, but then a really important part of it was connecting a number of different representatives from different criminal justice agencies, including the National County Lines Coordination Centre, the Regional Intelligence Unit, probation, and a couple of different police services, to work together to connect different individuals. And I think in this case, they were only looking at those people who were involved as perpetrators. But actually, if you use the safer custody intelligence, I suspect that you would have developed more knowledge around those people involved and the ways in which this network was connected to people who were self-harming, isolating within the prison, attempting suicide, those who are victims of violence, etc. But there's a few noticeable things around this I2 chart, and one of them is the female accomplice at the top. Now you'll see that she was connected to someone who was involved in county lines and was co-defendants with a known OCG nominal, but she was connected to 10 other prisons, either as a listed visitor or on PIN phone numbers. And those prisons were both within the region and nationally spread. But it was quite difficult to for that information to be relayed particularly effectively in terms of closing down her ability to cross over to multiple prisons. And there's some perhaps learning about how do we support women who may be implicated in these networks to either disclose such or get safe routes out if, for example, they're being exploited into that involvement. And I think it's instructive here that she was known to the local authority as a known care leaver, and yet the local authority were relatively reticent and reluctant to act to protect her, even though they were known to her. And that's also the case for the female accomplice about midway down the slide, who was also known to the local authority and also implicated in county lines. And again, there was relatively relaxed approach from the local authority. I think overall, one of the most important things to note about this network is essentially it started with an individual who was not a known OCG nominal, and sat below a lot of the institutional architecture and intelligence matrices around management of SOCT within prison. And yet actually there was quite a lot of activity happening, but the systems don't allow to, for example, register a prison formed OCG group or network. And it also means that you can't kick into various structures around intelligence gathering. But fortunately, in this case, there was a case made that allowed for the involvement of the intelligence units, and that helped develop this network, and then also helped develop the possibility of prosecution. There's other known female accomplices there, and again you can see that she goes to other prisons as well. I think one of the important things to note about this network was, as a consequence of developing this intelligence and gathering this information, 2 people were moved out of the prison on a disruptive transfer. One of them was moved to a prison in the long-term and high security estate, and they welcomed that. They knew exactly what they needed to do to be transferred, and they deliberately wanted to be transferred because they knew that that would expand the network. So actually there was nothing disruptive about it, and it wasn't particularly tactical, but it's quite an ingrained response to disruptive or perceived problematic individuals. One of the other individuals involved in the network, he also was transferred on a disruptive move, and when he arrived at the next prison was assaulted, presumably because he could now no longer carry out his functions within the network. But I think what that illustrates is we think of disruption as not involving a risk to the individual, like we would do with someone moving on an ACT document because they're at risk of self-harm or suicide, or recognising that someone transferring might be at heightened risk of self-harm and suicide. But we don't think about the extent to which someone who's involved in a criminal network or criminal enterprise might also be at risk, either to themselves or from others, as a consequence of moving them to other prisons. So I think we need to think about what our response is to people who we know to be involved in criminal activity or criminal networks within prison. And you can see here this kind of morphing in the way in which people who are involved in county lines of the community become just more widely connected with other forms of criminal enterprise, and just form a relatively informal and diffuse criminal network that is capable of quite quick adaptation. And it illustrates the ways in which people can and do communicate across a range of prisons. So I think some things that we learned from this case study was the role of prison visitors in terms of their facilitation of criminal networks and the extent to which they are relied upon to facilitate the movement of contraband into prisons, but also the extent to which you could prevent exploitation by allowing women in particular, but other visitors, to disclose when they're being asked to do things that are that they're uncomfortable with. There's some concerns, I think, about the exploitation and the ways in which women might be being victimised to either coordinate activities, to be a driver, to transport goods, to bring goods into prison, and the responsibility of various agencies, including local authorities, to protect individuals known to them. I've mentioned the counterproductive effects of disruptive moves. There's a query, I think, for me at least, around the extent to which some of this activity constitutes modern slavery. And I don't think we've thought enough around the extent to which the exploitation of individuals involved in drug dealing and criminal enterprise that occurs within a prison might also fall within modern slavery. There was a real a theme around the extent to which criminal networks can quite quickly adapt their methods. And one of the things we became very aware of was the ways in which individuals who were either within prison or recently released from prison will very quickly communicate to their peers which prisons you should use which method for. So ex-prison use a throwover, ex-prison use a drone, ex-prison use and corrupt staff. And one of the things I'm sure we're going to talk about a little more is the need for both coordinated and collaborative efforts within a prison. So efforts to join together and work together and engage in intelligence analysis together between safety, security and, for example, OMU and residents. But also the need for joint agency working and intelligence analysis. The information on that I2 chart would not have been possible without, for example, probation and the police in particular. But actually, you need to have those relationships formed before in order to gain that intelligence when you need it, and to then work quite collaboratively and promptly when you have an issue such as a throwover arise. So I think that's me for now. I'm sure we're going to have questions after Nick has finished on the last couple of slides.
Brilliant, thank you, Kate. And Katie, are you able to just run up the slide pack again, and we can just start to work through now. That was brilliant, Kate. That was brilliant, Kate. Thank you. Yeah, brilliant, Kate.
It should just be loading up now. Let me know when you can see it.
That's brilliant. Okay, I'll take control of that. We're just going to go through a whistle-stop tour of what we've done before. Should be a quicker system to this, but I don't know it. There we go. Right, hopefully everybody can see that okay. Right, so yeah, what can you do, or what can we do? And as Kate just alluded to, there's some elements of what we need to be doing in relation to this, and we kind of break that down a little bit into a bit of an acronym. Everyone likes an acronym, but RICEs. So basically, what we're trying to do is support the wider business, our organisations, to recognise, record, refer, and respond to these issues a little bit more constructively. With that better awareness, and we just need to make sure that our staff are equipped to understand the ongoing criminalities that are involved and how to recognise in their various forms the participation and exploitation that's going on, and know what to record and how to escalate those concerns and how to respond in the first instance to them as well. And we are proactively working on a number of different approaches to do that, as certainly as part of EPSIG, but also now the wider HMPPS are getting a little bit more strategic in the response to this. Certainly we've been able to produce some supporting documents for probation and prisons in terms of 7-minute briefing guides, for example, language guides which are useful. We have reference packs which can be used in approved premises in relation to county lines, and also we have intelligence supporting tools like the backcasting toolkit that's used to look back when an event's happened and look at points at which we could have intervened and done things a little bit better, or elicited some better information, and data collection plans for our intelligence systems, so that actually they can be a bit more structured in getting information around particular individuals as well. But that recording as well, the improved completion of submissions of intelligence as well, and making sure we can put that little bit of the jigsaw puzzle back in so that our systems can be a little bit more effective at looking at the issues, and also just responding to the more you know, the more you see as well element of it, encountering the fact that it's happening but we're not particularly looking well. That's utilising the systems that we have got, effectively recording things, utilising NOMIS as best we can in its current iteration. Thankfully, it's getting a little bit of an update, which will make things better. NDLIS as well, and of course OASIS, much underutilised by a lot of teams, and access to that as well is a little bit thwarted, but we're within the prisons as well to the wider staffing group. So again, areas that we're trying to influence and support to work better. And then that referring, considering the exploitation in local referral processes for case management, the ACT or CSIPs, our mappers, our integrated offender management, and making sure that we respond in a multi-agency way that works well. And we are trying to produce some what works well, supportive documentation and systems to do that. But then it's about that intelligence gathering. This would not only increase the speed of intelligence gathering regarding the recalls, but also reduce the likelihood of simply moving criminal activity as part of HMPPS, or indeed increasing it and expanding the network as a result of transfers, as well as Kate alluded to in terms of that criminal network that was used as a case study. And also just making sure that yourselves, that you're in a position to be able to receive the most up-to-date intelligence around county lines from intelligence units that you might well be linked into as well. The information is there, that we just need to make sure that we're accessing it as well, asking the right questions, and making sure that when we do have that information, it's linked across those wider departments as well. This isn't just a security issue, so it shouldn't just sit within the security envelope as well. Data is shared around nominals to our safety teams, our offender management units, reducing reoffending. So everybody could just take their little part in dealing with the particular issues that these networks create. And the C there, that's the collaborative approaches across the prison estate, probation, with wider agencies such as health, education, children's services. All that's in line with the public health approach proposed under the Police Crime and Sentencing Courts Bill in 2021. So, we do have a framework that we need to be responding to make sure that we collaborate better. And making sure that enforcement action on individuals, that's the E, is associated with the criminal network, taking account of their relative participation and considering the possibility of criminal exploitation charges under the Modern Slavery Act. Again, what Kate alluded to in her presentation as well. We're very much on the boundary of trying to understand how this impacts across modern day slavery, for example, and the issues that creates in terms of our safeguarding and our supportive elements of it around exploitation. So that does then link nicely into the S, which is our safeguarding and public protection. And HMPS, we need to develop its strategy around safeguarding those who are criminally exploited and are engaging with prisons. Certainly those visitors, families and named phone contacts may well be victims themselves, and they should be treated and supported as such. We know that greater urgency and priority that should be given to follow up on our safeguarding and public protection concerns as well, associated with those participating criminal networks and county lines, where it is involving vulnerable individuals, and making sure that women, children, those in local authority care and those with care experience and former looked after children, for example, are better identified within our systems. The business is taking a strategic response to this. We do have the initiation of a county lines oversight group that's now getting a senior lead director in relation to it that will coordinate a lot of HMPPS activity around this space, because again, what we've identified, a lot of teams are trying to do some work around it, but if we pull it all together, we can structure it and we can support each other better in terms of responding to the particular issues that this faces. And as I said, we're not just sitting here and watching what's going on. We're trying to do some effective work around it as part of EPSIG and our cross-cutting team as well, and supporting and development of those strategic responses. It's a heavy laden slide there, but I'll leave that up there for you to peruse through. But I just will highlight a couple of things there that we are trying to work with our learning and development teams a lot better, so that actually we can integrate awareness packages early doors to our staff. We need to develop that through the L&D arm for probation services as well, but we have got products out there already in relation to it within women's specific training, which is a West package, and gangs and harmful group behaviours, which is another developed package as part of the safety directorate. Certainly we've got those language guides and briefing sheets as well, which are available. We're developing our What Works Well response as well, and that'll produce a county lines frequently asked question type product as well. We have those intelligence tools, the backcasting toolkits and data collection plans that we're willing to help intelligence teams use and develop, in our safety teams as well. We're also very much in tune with the current Directorate Security Action Plan as well in relation to this. And something else to note there is the anti-criminal exploitation network, and if this is something that you're particularly interested in, this is about us linking up with frontline practitioners, officers, boots on the floor, frontline workers, etc., in relation to this, so they're better sighted to some of these issues, and we can give them the latest trends and issues, etc. And also for us to get very direct feedback in relation to the ongoing and dynamic world that the county lines and criminal exploitation is, so that actually we can get that back into the business a bit quicker as well and start supporting it, so it's not filtered out through other sort of areas. And we can sort of process a little bit of what's going on. So that's newly forming, and that's hopefully going to be a really good initiative. And yeah, of course, there's some of the other areas there. But yeah, for probation colleagues which are on the line as well, we are doing a lot of work within that space. We are supporting to our community teams via reviews of the approved premises, unpaid work schemes and court groups as well, and we're updating the equip maps in relation to accessible support and advice around county lines and criminal exploitation. And some of our future work that we're going to be going into as well is the serious violence duty and modern day slavery, and we're supporting the wider MOJ in the initial responses in relation to that. And that kind of wraps it up a little bit, to be honest with you. I mean, our next point of call would naturally be questions, which is a bit awkward to do on one of these particular insights presentations, but we're happy if there's elements to be put into the chat, please do, and we'll try and answer those. Be online now for the next 15 minutes at least in relation to it, and of course you're more than welcome to email us with any of your particular questions. Or if you have anything direct for Kate, Dr. Kate Gooch as well. I believe, Kate, you'll be on the line for a little bit longer just to respond to anything that may come up in relation to that. So hopefully people are able to come on board and ask some questions. Tracy.
Yeah, hi there. I'm a probation officer working in Northamptonshire, and I've just recently been allocated some county lines and gang stuff, which I haven't done for years, and I'm really struggling with a current case that was initially assessed as low risk in court, because obviously we didn't do it, you know, it was what you were saying earlier, it was just like drug dealing. Anyway, this individual is only 20 years old, and he's now in one of the prisons, and he's involved with having contraband items thrown over. Recently, because he's on remand, he's not got an allocated POM, so I've requested that he's moved because of the risk that he is as a MAPA level 2, so that hasn't gotten anywhere. But more recently, he got his 15-year-old girlfriend to try and smuggle in Class A substances to him. So as a practitioner, you know, and I'm kind of raising it, and I'm directly liaising with Northamptonshire Police, because the female that he's using, it seems the entire family are being groomed, exploited. She's got younger brothers that they're typically behaving in a way that would suggest that they're kind of being brought on board. I've done the referral to RISE and things like that, but as a practitioner, I'm not really sure what more I could be doing, or is there a specific team in the prison that I could go directly to try and get some things kind of sorted for this person, because the risks are just significant, and obviously the usual struggling with adults, so children's services, and you know, we've gone to child protection and stuff like that. So I've just been really sort of I mean, it's opened my eyes up, and as a practitioner it's really given me other stuff to get stuck into. So but I'm just kind of hitting a brick wall with what more I can be doing on how to raise the ongoing concerns that we've got. I
feel that it's quite a complex case in relation to that as well, isn't it? And it's quite difficult without knowing the specific dynamics within that area or the prison involved to offer some good advice, other than it's about, I mean, this individual, I guess, is on remand, and that really does lock out a lot of the support and issues because people won't tune into it. And you're right around the fact that they won't get the designated offender management sort of support, etc. I would really be tuning into the safety safeguarding teams within the prison establishment, and highlighting those particular concerns from that point of view, because from a security point of view, they'll, again, what Kate was alluding to earlier on, it's unless they hit certain triggers, it's very difficult to get the support network around particular individuals or the responses that you want. But look at the wider teams within there and making sure that there's the safeguarding teams are engaged, and maybe they can bring in some different support packages or a different way of approaching it.
I mean, I'm sorry, because he's in breach of a community order and he's on remand for violent offences linked to the victim's sister. So, this is the typical case of what you're talking about. I've even approached the judge that's adjourned the trial because it's going to trial, and said, look, can we at least activate the suspended sentence, because he's served so much time on remand as it is. So I've tried to expedite a breach. So I've tried to do everything as a practitioner to just get him moved out of the prison that he's in. I mean, it's something out of honestly, it's like a film. He's only 20 years old himself, and it's like it's just incredible. And he's not even from Northamptonshire. He originates in London, and you could just see this just developing, and at the same time we've got the huge safeguarding concerns, and and I've emailed intel to the police. I've got so I'm doing everything I can. I just don't seem to be achieving risk reduction for the victims. That's my concern. I don't know whether to email you whether that might be sort of for a bit of further advice, or
it might be easier to take an element of it offline. It's very difficult for us to deal with the individual cases, but maybe we can open it up. We have probation colleagues as well, which are part of our team, and they're going to be much better able to look at avenues of support in relation to it. To be honest with you, Katie and I are very much the prison side of it, and I do understand that we have our dynamics around offender flows now, and the movement of prisoners. So somebody who's on remand, you kind of, even if they're from London, are not necessarily going to get to any other establishment whilst that establishment services the court that they're in. Their case is being held at. So it's about those safeguarding teams and those other teams within the establishment, that broader picture. So maybe those discussions with those teams about the wider support, the safeguarding element of it. When we start to use the language of safety and safeguarding, it brings a different response within establishments as well. If we can really highlight that, then maybe that's an avenue for you. But I'd be interested to see how that progresses for you. And again, please email with a contact, and we can see whether we can pick that up in another format as well within that region if we're doing some particular work within there.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
We do have some questions in the meeting chat as well. Is there support in place for young people who want to leave? Incredibly complex issue, that one, to be honest with you. And I'd like to say yes, we do it, but we do a lot of work within the YCS space. So Katie, I don't know whether you have any particular knowledge in relation to this. What I will say is that what I've learned from the intervention side of things is that very difficult about specific intervention for people that want to exit the county lines agenda or gangs who are young, because of the risks involved. It's very much a case-by-case basis and support with the op worker, and there tends to be led to supporting people through maturation to the point at which they exit or can exit. It's very, very difficult entrapment for them, so it's a very complex case. And I'm sorry, I can't offer you a sort of an immediate response type fix in relation to it. It's too broad a subject at this particular time. Katie, I don't know if you know anything from the YCS space in relation to this.
I'd just say more generally, I think we rely a lot on the third sector and charities to offer support. So I know specifically the St Giles Trust and the Prince's Trust have programmes and interventions in place. And they're different in different regions across the country and in different prisons in terms of what they can and what they do offer. But there is kind of through the gate support and some interventions in prison and kind of peer mentoring, and particularly on release. And I know a lot of probation colleagues work closely with St Giles Trust and Prince's Trust, and I'm sure there's others out there. So I think it's something that we need to develop and explore a bit more. And I know it's not consistent across the country and it does depend on the region, but there's work out there being done, but yeah, predominantly by third sector organisations at present.
Okay. Thank you, Katie. In relation to that, the other question there is, how's information currently shared between prisons and probation? Wow. Yes, so it depends which way we're looking at it. So we do know that National County Lines Coordination Centre do share their intelligence data with regional intelligence units, and that does link into probation intelligence as well. So there's that information sharing element of it. When we get down to establishment levels, this is one of our particular issues. It's just making sure that it doesn't just sit within the security envelope, that it is shared out amongst OMU and our probation colleagues and the offender management system as well. And that's again something that we're trying to address by getting teams to work a little bit closer in relation to it. The formal dissemination of information is normally through the Mercury IR system, which again, it doesn't necessarily, the dynamics of that don't necessarily lend themselves to some of these particular issues. It's very good at dealing with OCGs and that aspect of it, but not necessarily dealing with the exploitation side of things. So it's basically really concentrating on the links between OMU safety teams as well as the safeguarding elements of it in terms of sharing information, and it's very much down to the local protocols as well. But we are looking through the County Lines Oversight Group at how we can make that more formal and how we can make the information exchange a lot more fluid and better, because our systems don't talk to each other either particularly well. NDLIS doesn't necessarily talk to NOMIS particularly well. We have one communication tool, it's Oasis, but it's not particularly well utilised across all our stakeholders. Prison officers can't get general access to Oasis for information as well. So
I think that was my question, and thank you so much for answering it. It comes from a place of well, sitting within L&D, it comes from a place of concern about the volume at which we're recruiting staff at the moment for obvious reasons. But my concern is that that is such an intricate way of trying to get information, and yet these are the cases that are likely to be allocated to our newer entrants on the basis of their risk level. And I think it's a process that we really need to highlight about how officers are meant to get this information, how they're meant to share it between each other. And when I think about the fact that I think as of this week, there is a campaign called the Think Child campaign, this could link quite nicely. So if you have those kind of expertise that you could link in, it's worth speaking to TJ Abrams, who's heading up that Think Child campaign, to have a conversation about how you weave this stuff in, because we are bringing in such numbers of staff and that message is being more and more diluted and is probably has regional variations. So I just think it should be promoted to have those conversations if you can.
No,
I don't know the answer.
No, but that is a fair comment, and as I said, alluded to earlier on, we are trying to work with our learning and development colleagues in terms of getting information and support around this particular agenda early doors. So we've certainly got that within the YCS, for example. So everybody that's entering the YCS estate as a new member of staff will be getting an awareness package around this, certainly within the female estate as well. But the complexities of the wider estate are causing us some particular issues at the moment. And also make sure that we need the parity of that with our probation services as well. So new entrants to those sort of systems are getting enough information around it as well. So yeah, value your comments, value your point. We've taken the details of that TJ Abrahams as well in terms of that campaign, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
That's great, thanks so much. The information's been really useful.
Thank you. We're nearly at time, and I do see that there's a link to the Think Child campaign. Thank you, Louise, part of our EPSIG team. Appreciate that. Thumbs up if I could do it as quick as somebody else has done that. But yeah, there we go. So, and then I've got a question there from Rebecca as well. We might need to take that one offline just to give it an appropriate response as well in the timescales that we've got, but that'll still be in the chat and we'll try and respond to that as well. Yeah, the identity matters. Yeah, I'll probably very quickly answer it. We are aware of the identity matters gang intervention as well within that YOI estate. And it's about making sure that people are referred to it appropriately as well. So yeah, we were certainly aware of it, Rebecca, and we have signposted it in a number of our reports as a potential intervention in relation to it as well. And to be honest with you, it's probably the only thing that's out there that we can really tangibly link to at the moment, whilst we're developing new interventions. But we're not there yet in terms of developing those new ones. But yeah, it's a valuable one, Rebecca, and we're aware of it. So I hope that answers your question. And I think we're on time, so we will have to leave it there. And I appreciate everybody that's come along today to listen to us around this particular agenda. We hope it's been of interest. We do value any comments as well, feedback in relation to it. We want to make our messaging as quick and succinct as possible to as many people as possible as well. So really appreciate your time. We hope we haven't scared you, and stay safe out there. Thank you ever so much.